Hi, I'm John, and welcome to Edgetone Studios. Happy holidays for 2023. I've got my star above my head. Now, Studiolive Series 3 mixers from Presonus are great mixers for live and studio use. But what if you could make them even better by upgrading them? Well, today I'm going to tell you how. Let's get to it. Okay, I know what you're thinking. The Studiolive Series 3 mixers from Presonus are digital mixer that are a one-piece unit with multiple inputs, multiple outputs, and they have no known third-party upgrades that you can do. So, in a way, you can't upgrade these mixers. They're the way they are. However, there are a couple things you can do to upgrade your setup with these mixers, and that's what I want to talk about today. Now, when I did my overview of the Studiolive Series 3, and you can check for the link above, I talked about how I used external preamps for much of my recording. And for me, coming from the Universal Audio, where the idea of the unison preamps, which allowed you to change the characteristic of the impedance to match the type of preamp you're trying to emulate with software, was really a neat idea. This idea that you could change the feel of your preamp to sound more like a Neve 1073 or sound more like an SSL channel strip without actually having those types of preamps in place. Well, you can't do that on a Studiolive. You have some great built-in effects, and you have really clean, I think they're called the X-Max preamps, and they sound great. I mean, really, you can record and make beautiful sounding music, albums, audio, books, whatever you're doing with these preamps. But sometimes you want some character, and sometimes you want some external control that you don't have through software. So in my case, I decided to buy a 500 series rack and fill it with preamps. And currently I have it outfitted with 8 of the SSL 6CH preamps, and those are front-ended now onto 8 combo jacks. So that ends up going into the line inputs of 8 of my channels on my mixer. And now I've basically replaced the X-Max preamps with the SSL 6CH preamps, which also can take instrument input through the front channel. So I'm set up to do direct guitar or bass recording through the preamps. I could potentially patch keyboards in there. Not currently how I'm set up, but it's still a possibility. And that's given me more flexibility. At any point in time, I could get different 500 series preamps and have a different flavor of preamp in the Presonus Studiolive. So let me show you a diagram of how that would be set up. So I've just cut and pasted some of the equipment here. You've got a microphone that would be going into the input on the 500 series rack. This could be coming from your studio tracking room. It could be plugged in direct. It could be going through a patch bay, but it's going into the input of the preamp on the 500 series. The output of that same channel on the 500 series, in my case, is going through a patch bay. So let's say it's going through patch bay point number 1 into the input, and coming on the lower output, this is at the back of the patch bay, into the combo jack on the Studiolive 32S. And in this case, it's going into number 17. So number 17 now is the same as the preamp for channel 1 on the 500 series rack. So now you've got control of the preamp from the front of the 500 series module, and you have a patch point on patch number 1 on the patch bay, where you could potentially plug an EQ in that channel, or you could plug a compressor, or you could plug both by coming out of the front of the patch bay. So this is the benefit of putting the preamp through a patch bay before going into the mixer, because now you can use an external preamp, external EQ, external compressor, any other external effects you want before it enters the Studiolive mixer, and in that way you have more control over external hardware that you can use with this setup. So you could potentially replace every preamp in the mixer with an external preamp. So that's upgrade number one, basically front end a preamp into the combo jack on the Studiolive mixer. Whether it's 500 series or whether it's just a rack mount preamp or a rack mount channel strip or a desktop preamp, it doesn't matter. Anything that is external could be plugged into the combo jack and give you this sort of flexibility. Okay, the second upgrade to the Studiolive Series 3 is, what if you could have a different digital analog converter instead of the one that's built into the Studiolive? And the reason I came upon that is when I had been using the Mo2 converters for the analog desk, when I was testing it out, and I'd gone back to the Presonus, I thought the Presonus didn't sound as good. And then I thought my switcher was not working properly. So I was now convinced I wanted a better DAC than what was built in. I thought, how could I do that? And I ended up ordering a new switcher because I thought my switcher wasn't working. Well, foolish me, I had just wired one of my speakers backwards, so it was out of phase. And when you have out of phase speakers, one moves out while the other one moves in, and it causes certain frequencies to cancel each other, and it makes the mix sound thinner and the sound coming out sound thinner, especially in the center position of the mix position. As I moved around the room, I heard this difference in sound. I heard the bass dropping out and coming back, and I realized my speakers were out of phase, but by then it was too late. I'd already ordered a new switcher, and I'd already ordered a new DAC. And how could I get a new DAC for the Studiolive? Well, Studiolive series mixers generally use two different outputs on them. You use the monitor output to drive your monitors in the studio. You might use the mains output to drive speakers in a tracking room so that you could have playback into that room. Or you'd use it in a live context to have the stage monitors or the room monitors being played from the mains. But in some cases, you may want to look at another output on the Studiolive, and that's called the AES digital output. So AES is a standard for digital signal transmission, just like ADAT is a standard and SPDIF is a standard. And Studiolive has a AES output on it, which is basically just the digital signal. It's the digital mix before it's gone through the DAC. So my thought was I could buy an external DAC, take the digital mix out of the AES output and run that into the external DAC and really upgrade the DAC that's built in. For those of you who don't know, DAC stands for Digital Analog Converter. This is one of the key components for your mixing. It's probably, besides your ears and the source that you're actually going to record in the first place and the monitors you want to listen on, which are incredibly important, and the room that you're in, so the sound of the room you're in is incredibly important. I would say the next most important thing besides all those is the digital analog converter, because that converter is taking the digital signal that you're processing in your DAW and turning it into the analog signal you're going to hear. And the more accurate and better sounding it is, the better your mixes are going to be, the better the sound of the music you're going to play is going to be. So in my case, I went and I ordered a Burl B2 Bomber digital analog converter. They make two types of B2 Bombers. They make the analog to digital converter, which is a 2-channel converter to take analog signals and digitize them, and the digital analog converter, which takes the digital signals and turns them into analog signals. And by coming out the AES output, which is by default assigned to the mains, I can listen to the main signal through my speakers in the studio. So I've now technically upgraded my DAC to the Burl B2 Bomber. And having gotten a new switcher as well, which actually quite improved my room, I'll probably cover that in another video, quite improved the sound in my room, I was able to do some very detailed listening between the Studiolive DAC and the Burl B2 Bomber DAC. And what I can say is this is, for most people, you're probably not going to care. The Studiolive DAC sounds really nice. When I first started listening to the differences, I was pretty sure they were almost identical. I did a bunch of comparisons on a bunch of different songs, some of my own mixes. I, at one point in time, had left speaker on one of the DACs, the right speaker on another DAC, trying to hear a difference that way as well. And it wasn't until I increased the volume, my listening and monitoring volume, significantly higher than I normally do. I don't mix very loud. I mix at a moderate level. Once I brought it up to, say, 80 dB, kind of that range, the difference became very clear. The burl suddenly had a lot more stereo width. The upper mids were a lot, I wouldn't say a lot brighter. They were more focused. They were kind of sharper. It's hard to describe improvements in audio quality because we all hear things differently. So I would say it sounded brighter, but it didn't sound brighter like artificially brighter. It just sounded like there was a clarity in those frequencies. And the bass frequencies just seemed to be more forward and punchier or direct to me, but subtly, very subtly. When I switch back and forth between the two, I have to really listen to hear those differences. But after listening for some time, the burl definitely has a one-up on the Studiolive. Had I not wired my speakers backwards and had them out of phase and thought something was wrong and thought that the Studiolive didn't sound as good as the Motu, I might not have even thought of doing that. But because I did that, I bought the burl, and in the long run, I'm keeping it. It sounds great. That's my main monitor now. The one issue in doing this, though, is you're coming out of the mains out, not the monitors out. So now when you hit solo, solo is not designed to solo in the mains. So you can't use soloing, say, when tracking, if you're listening to the burl DAC, in my case, the external DAC coming through the AES outputs. However, I've got the monitor sends also hooked up to my monitor switcher, so I just can switch to monitor mode while tracking. The difference in quality is subtle, so it's not really going to be a big difference. And then when mixing, I can stay on the burl, and most of the time I'm not tracking. More often I'm mixing or just listening to music in the room. So there you have it, 2 different ways that you could upgrade your Studiolive Series 3 mixer, both on the input side to improve your preamps, on the output side to improve your DAC. I hope you found this tip useful. Let me know if you plan on doing this, or maybe I've already done this. Maybe I'm not the first person to think of this. It's rare that I would be. And I hope you have a great holiday season. I may have another video before the end of the year, but if I do not, Happy New Year. And thanks for watching. Bye.